Hi, everyone. Good morning and a big welcome from Cubicle. My name is Anu and I am your host for today. Apologies for the little delay and the technical glitch from my side. Um, we are today, as part of our Cubicles webinar series, going to be talking about all things data literacy. And today's theme kind of starts from the macroeconomic or the large scale of how data literacy sits. And then we're going to go down to talk a little bit of aspects of its micro level, which is more at an organizational or a company or a corporate level. So, with me today, I'm joined by two fantastic speakers and co hosts and guests, and we'll get into that a little bit later on. Um, just to give a little bit of idea of what to expect as a part of today's agenda, we're going to kick off with a little bit to talk about what's new in the world of data literacy. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's in the news, and then I'm going to go in and introduce our panelists and my guests for today. So like I mentioned before, we're going to talk about the data literacy landscape from a macro perspective with Jane, from data to the people. And then we're also going to talk about how organizations are responding to the dire need and rationale for data literacy in their organizations with Charlotte from Plural Strategy. And in around about 30 minutes, we should wrap up all of that, and we will leave about 5 to 10 minutes at the end for some questions with both Jane, Charlotte, and myself as well. Throughout the course of this presentation, we are going to put some polls on for our listeners. So feel free to just join in and answer those questions. Let us know a little bit of where you're from, what your role within your organization is, and also just kind of what excites you about data literacy and how you're involved in the subject matter of data literacy. So just going to get straight into it. Um, our poll on the screen right now is a little bit about kind of what your role in your organization is. So feel free to just answer your questions in there as we go with the webinar. And of course, there's going to be a lot of things discussed. So if you have any questions, feel free to hit the Q&A section on your control panel and leave all your questions, which we're going to discuss at the end of the webinar. So a little bit about what is new in the world of data literacy. And we started doing this. We're going to talk a little bit about current subjects in the data literacy space. And an interesting one, and in fact, Jane shared this with me recently, is about the need for data literacy within the US military. And of course, we see from a macro strategic perspective, there is a lot of national data strategies that are being rolled out. Governments are starting to become more and more interested in looking at data as a strategic asset. With the recent rise of artificial intelligence and all things data, interestingly, data literacy and the need for data literacy is now becoming imperative when looking to hire commanders or hire people into the US Army. So, interestingly enough, across the entire US military, there's thousands of soldiers every day that are manually grabbing screen grabs of databases and popping them on PowerPoints. And if you just think about the collective wastage of time that adds up to, it's about 25 million hours per week. And any data enthusiast on this webinar can understand how much scope for improvement and optimization there is just through incorporations of tools around data analytics and so on. So after understanding that data is a strategic asset, the Army has recognized that reading, working, analyzing, and comprehending with data is almost as important as physical endurance when it comes to recruitment in the military. So for this, they've started to put together a commander dashboard, like the way commanders can kind of look at all of their aggregate data for their respective regions, um, coaching them to read and write and even infer data points. And of course, rise of data visualization and commander assessment programs in the space. So um, if you have a future in the military, do not still shy away from getting a few visualization skills under your belt for the same. Now, in line of our theme for today, just coming back from the whole macro down to the micro level, what's new in the world of, I guess, at an organizational level is the creation of the role of the CDLO, which is the Chief Data Literacy Officer. Has just made its way into the C suite, and not to be confused, of course, with the CDO, which is the Chief Data Officer. Now, usage of data is very important in all mature data literate organizations. And the difference, I suppose, between the CDO and the CDLO is that the CDO will focus on things around data governance, data analysis, innovation, and creation of enterprise or business value. Like there will always be that sort of tie-in back to EV or profitability for the CDO, but the CDLO is going to make sure that there is upskilling or literacy goals being implemented in the organization, that they're trying to tie back data literacy into the DNA of the organization. So, the chief, I guess, key responsibility areas or KRAs for a CDLO are going to be around measurement criteria of success of a data literacy program, or a democratization of data that we talk about in a big way at Cubicle as well. And of course, data literacy within the organization, understanding different personas and mapping literacy programs and skills back to these people, which of course we will get into a little bit further. But before that, um, very, very excited to have two absolutely phenomenal people with me here today: Jane from Data to the People and Charlotte from Plural Strategy. And of course, they're going to be co hosting and co chatting with me on both of our macro and micro sections. So, just to get into it, the macro perspective of data literacy, looking at it from perhaps a more bird's eye or a vulture view on top. Welcome, Jane, and thank you for joining us today. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Lovely to be here.
Jane is joining us from Australia, which is very late in the day for you. So appreciate you making the time to join us here. And a
No,
little
that's
bit about Jane here. She is not only the co-founder of Data to the People, she is also the originator of one of the most advanced competency frameworks within data literacy, which is the Data Abilities Skill Assessment Framework. And she is a highly regarded business intelligence practitioner. She works with loads of CEOs, NGOs, organizations to understand what kind of skills are necessary at an organizational level, and is also part of publishing the global data literacy benchmark report annually. So we at Cubicle have been a big follower of all of her thought leadership on LinkedIn. If you are interested in data literacy in any way, I highly urge you to go and check out this report. It's called the Global Data Literacy Benchmarking Report, and I will love to hear it straight from Jane. Jane, would you help us understanding a little bit more, of course, about the report, but also the framework itself?
certainly. Thank you very much for those joining us today. I am very, very pleased to be spending some time with you. I think before we started, we worked out that we've got two hosts in Ireland, and we've got me in Australia, and Anu, I know that you're in India at the moment. So truly a global webinar. So it's wonderful to be part of that conversation. I'll start by briefly introducing our Dataabilities competency framework. And when we started our work, which is now 6 years ago, the concept of data literacy was really only emerging into mainstream conversation. There was no agreed definition and no agreed standards. So to fill this void and to break down a topic that was confusing to many and abstract to most, we built the first evidence-based data literacy competency framework. Try saying that 3 times fast, building on research from Dalhousie University in Canada. Our framework has now been adopted by public and private sector organisations across the globe as the foundation of their efforts to measure, map and develop data literacy across their organisations. The framework covers 4 domains of data concepts: reading, writing, and comprehension, because we believe at its core, data literacy is our ability to read, write, and comprehend data, just as literacy in our native language is our ability to read, write, and comprehend language. In our framework, we have 6 levels of progression. We range from level 1 through to level 6. And as we progress through each of the levels, you can see that we start to see more advanced competencies coming through, more advanced skills related to those competencies. We don't start our framework at 0. And that is a deliberate intention here. And that is because we don't believe that any person currently existing in our current societies is illiterate. We don't believe that anyone is data illiterate. Purely by engaging in society, engaging in the workplace, engaging in school, or engaging in conversations with our families, we're demonstrating data literacy competencies and capabilities. I'll touch briefly on the Global Data Literacy Benchmark, which is our way of providing some intelligence back to the global community. And now in its 3rd year, the Global Data Literacy Benchmark is providing an opportunity for organisations to see how they measure up against their industry and region and occupations. Instead of reporting at a level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the benchmark study, we group our respondents into much more friendly terms. So we talk about the curious, the confident, and the coaches, and certainly recognizing that within any organization, we need to have a mix of all 3. We need to have those curious and wanting to develop their skills. We need to have the confident who are able to work independently, who are able to demonstrate competencies that do not require instruction or guidance from others. And then as much as we need the curious to be wanting to learn and to be developing these skills, we need the coaches to help them develop those skills, the coaches to lead them in the ways of the organization, to help them understand how those competencies apply to them. If we can go to
Absolutely.
the next.
And just in line with, I read the report and I thought there were some really interesting insights. You look at it from multiple perspectives. You look at it from sort of a regional, a domain, and an industry and competence perspective. But there were a few things that really jumped out for me. You used a really interesting analogy that we have turned the volume up on data literacy, right? Like everybody's talking about it. It is on every CEO's agenda. We're creating roles like CDLOs, like you mentioned, but it's now time to tune the dial. So you say you've turned the volume up, but you now need to like fine tune and adjust what needs to be done as part of that. So I guess what would you say would be the top maybe 3, 4 things that organizations need to do to fine tune this dial?
Yeah. So when we're talking with organizations about addressing data literacy and really tuning that dial, it's about understanding where they are now. So taking stock, if you will, and saying, how can we assess or measure where we are as an organization right now? We can look at what data literacy currently looks like inside that organization across a range of roles and functions. So understanding where we are now is the first piece. The next piece is to be able to say, all right, we know where we are now, but where do we want to be? And what does that look like for different areas of the organization? And this is where we start to see that fine tuning. And we were talking previously about sort of turning up the bass and downing the treble and equalizing in that sense. So for different roles and different job families within the organization, we're going to need a different mix of skills and certainly a different depth of skills. To say that there needs to be an homogenous level of data literacy within the organisation is just not realistic. I think that laying common foundations is incredibly helpful for building awareness and establishing a shared understanding of the importance of data literacy. But it is so important when we're talking about building data literacy within an organisation that we're working with the concept of the individual. And when we start with the individual and try to understand what skills and competencies are needed for their particular role or function, that's when we're able to bring the right resources and supports to them. So if we've understood where we are now and understand where we want to be for different roles and responsibilities, we can then pinpoint the particular competencies and the depth of competencies to bring about the right resources and methods to develop those skills.
Yeah, and just in line with that, talking about competencies as an e-learning specialist myself and working at Cubicle, we notice, which was exactly in line with your report as well, there is a glaring gap between the coaches and the curious, right? So there is this dire need of basically converting the curious to a confident and eventually a coach level. But interestingly, in the 2022 report, there is a big gap that needs to be filled over there. So I noticed data analysis, data collection, and data visualization were three competencies that really, really jumped out. What do you think organizations can do to really convert, I guess, the confident into coaches and the curious into confidence?
Certainly, if I start with the confident to coaches, this is about, strangely play on words, building the confidence of the confidence. We need to give our confident cohort opportunities to lead, opportunities to demonstrate their skills, opportunities to practice taking a project with a different team to test out their analysis skills, test out their visualization. And a lot of organizations can do that through things like hackathons. Secondments are a great way to, to sort of build skills whilst on the job. It's really about building the confidence within that group to be able to say, well, actually, I do know what I'm talking about. I can assist others. Actually, I can teach others how to do these particular things. With regards to the curious, moving into that confidence space, it's really about equipping them with the language and the familiarity with competency and how that relates to their job. People, in the vast majority of cases, we're not going to be in jobs that we can't do. We're in jobs that we can function in. We're in jobs that extend our skills to some level, but we're not incompetent in the roles that we're holding. So how can we help every individual within the organization say, oh, when you're talking about data collection, that's actually the interaction notes that I record after I've spoken to a customer. I can see how that ties together. Therefore, my curiosity around what is data collection, I'm actually already doing that. And so if we can help individuals see how the competencies actually play out in their day-to-day, then we're able to start to build their confidence that they are actually already demonstrating a number of these competencies. We're just helping put a language and a framework around that.
Right. And looking at the regional perspective as well, I noticed you mentioned in your report that the highest number of coaches are in markets like the UK and India, and the lowest would be kind of maybe in Australia. The last webinar that we had, we shared a study by Click, which was talking about countries kind of coming at the forefront and putting together a national data strategy. Do you think that kind of percolates at an organizational level, and that's why we're seeing a rise in the number of coaches in these countries? Do you think it's generally to do with upskilling, or like what do you think the primary reasons of these regional differences are?
I think the primary reason is awareness, and certainly the industries and the regions that we've seen leading this space. There is a very, very clear mandate, certainly in public sector work that I've been involved in, where there has been a federal or a state mandate that public service will achieve levels of data literacy, etc. Obviously, there's going to be a focus of those organisations towards understanding and then developing the data literacy of their workforce. In industries where there is heavy regulation, public compliance and reporting measures, they're often the industries that we're seeing as well as being leaders in adopting data literacy programs as a way of working. Not to say they've got the highest results, but certainly they're the leaders in terms of stepping into that space. So financial services, absolutely, and energy, chemicals, those sorts of bodies where there is that level of public accountability, much more so than other industries. So I think awareness is really the first part, and having that very clear directive, whether that's from the industry leadership or in case of public service, the government, to have that direction and that mandate to focus on data literacy as a core capability within the organization.
So, excitingly enough, Jane, I hear that the next year or this year's report is about to drop in December. Um, I thought it was interesting to see that in the last report you mentioned that almost 44% people needed help with concepts and culture of data in general. But this year's report, and thanks for sharing an excerpt of the report that's due to still be dropped with us here at Cubicle, only 11% can help people actually with those concepts and culture. So is there any like good news? Has the gap widened? Are we doing better? Like, what do you think?
I've alluded to it in some of my comments that the big takeout from the 2023 report, which I'm very happy to make available as a pre-release to people attending today's webinar, is that we need to develop the confidence to coach. So we need to invest more in that confident cohort, because until we can start to shift them to the left, if you will, because that's how they're visualized, until we can start to shift those confident into that coaching position, we're not going to be able to have a sizable shift in the overall levels of data literacy within the organization. So there is work to do. Pleasingly, there is some advancements in some of the regions, certainly in some industries. The level of comfort with individual competencies is fairly consistent with last year's, but we are pleased this year to introduce a new region, which is Singapore. So we're moving into 6 regions for the 2023 report.
Well, that's amazing. And thanks everyone for everybody that's tuned in here and is going to be watching the webinar later. I highly recommend that you download both the 2022 and 23 report just to get a little idea of the comparison and draw on all of the things that Jane has shared with us. Thanks, Jane. On just the end note for your bit, like you said, empowering the curious. Everybody doesn't need to be a coach. You want to share and push the confident further left. Um, what would your last kind of words be for even perhaps somebody who's looking to use a framework or a competency map for their
Yeah.
organization?
I would, I know that we have up on the screen, measure, map, and develop. We must measure, map, then develop. What I see a lot of organizations starting with is data literacy. We need training. Okay, so let's roll out a sort of standardized program to everyone. When we're not tailoring the learning for the specific roles and levels of competence within the organization, we're losing people. We're not engaging them on that personal impact that the development of these competencies is going to have. So where to from here? Please measure, map, then develop. And if we can do that, we're ironically taking a data-driven approach to developing data literacy, and the results are going to be much stronger.
That's amazing. Thanks so much, Jane. Those were all really, really wonderful insights. And just in line with that, another poll for you all, which you saw earlier, is just to identify which persona do you think you sit in? Are you a confident, curious, or a coach? And of course, pop in your details to us if you want to receive an early copy of the 2023 report. Um, Thanks, Jane. And with that, I am going to welcome Charlotte, our other speaker for the day, who we work really closely with here at Cubicle. Welcome, Charlotte. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Really good to have you here. So, just for context, Charlotte here with us heads HR, talent acquisition, and development at Plural Strategy, which is a rapidly growing consulting firm with offices in London and New York. Charlotte is based in London. And prior to Plural Strategy, she's had a long stint with BCG and EY. So, like myself, she's very adept with professional services upskilling. So, it's going to be a great chat. And beyond L&D, we're also going to touch on some of her experience about how things like hiring, culture, and other things tie into data literacy. So, firstly, Charlotte, thank you for joining us. It's nice to talk to you outside of a catch up cubicle call.
Definitely.
Just to kick into it, I mean, would you start with telling us a little bit more about Plural Strategy and a little bit about your role in the firm as well?
Absolutely. So, Plural, as you mentioned, we've got offices in London and New York. We're growing quite quickly. We're a strategy consulting firm. So, the majority of our team are consultants. They work with data a lot. So, data literacy, obviously, really important topic for us. Because we're growing, we also have a lot of new talent coming into the business. So, a lot of people who are kind of fresh out of university or career transitioning from another job. We see people with quite a variety of skills coming into the organization, which again makes kind of data literacy and giving everyone the opportunity to learn those skills who might not have had those opportunities previously, super important. We also have our functions team as well, who support all of our consultants. So we have kind of, we do have a range of people with different skills and focus within the organization. So I'm our head of HR and talent, so I look after all things people. So everything with my team from hiring and getting excellent, really talented new people into the business, all the way through their journey with us, through their kind of performance management and development, L&D, through to, when people move on, connecting with our alumni still. So yeah, full employee journey for me.
The whole cycle, right? And in fact, like you mentioned, it's a very strategy and M&A focused consulting business. So data is your bread and butter. You have to democratize data. You have to make sure people are getting all the tools and technologies that you need. And then, of course, one pillar of that is working with learning and getting people those tools and education in those tools to make a central holistic data informed decision. So just looking at that, I guess, three pillars. Maybe would you like to share with us a little bit about kind of what tools you guys use, how you decide on what to get for the business, how do you work on democratizing data within the organization, and of course, around data education as well?
Absolutely. I mean, for consultants, obviously Excel is, everyone's bread and butter. It's so important. And, we do see people coming into business with kind of a variety of familiarity with that. We're really degree agnostic in our hiring. So we might have someone who studied English at university or languages, and they're coming in and they're like, yeah, I haven't touched Excel since school. But we also have people who've, worked on, statistics degrees or something, where they use it a lot. So we have a real variation of kind of talent coming into our business with a real differentiation of skills. But then we also use different tools as well. So, there's new advances in data tools all the time. So things like Alteryx, that's something that we're really starting to use more and more, especially when we're working with really large data sets. And I think it's really important that often some of the more advanced data analytics programs might not be things that people had access to at university or in previous roles, whether it's due to degree subject or background, but also due to some of the costs of those programs, or your university might be a Power BI university and we might use Alteryx. So there's so many data programs out there, and and great ones. And the world is moving forward in this space all of the time. There's constantly new innovations, better ways of working with data. So I think the data education piece is so important because, you know, you've got kind of almost two angles on the education side. You've got, you know, people coming for us. You've got people coming in who are new to the world of work or new to the world of consulting, and they really need to build those core skills. And they're coming in with a range of experience, but they could be learning everything from scratch.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, you've got people who might have been in the organization for 10 years, but we're using a new program. They still need to learn that. They might be an absolute, you know, master at Excel, but Alteryx is completely new. And though there are a lot of transferable skills, that education piece to get them up to speed quickly, so important.
Yeah.
And then I think for us, democratization is a really interesting one because, you know, I think for a lot of larger firms, democratization is giving everyone access to the data sets they need. Obviously, for a lot of our team, the data sets they need are actually ones that come from our clients. So it's quite an interesting situation because our team have to really quickly upskill and become familiar with dealing with data in lots of different formats. All of our clients will have different systems, different ways of presenting and handing over data. So they have to become really adept at being really flexible and adaptable with how they manage that data.
Of course.
And then I think, you know, internally, obviously, you know, we try and utilize their expertise as much as possible across the business. Lots of people who are on our consulting team get involved with internal projects and things like that on the side, which is great because it both upskills our ops team, and lets us take advantage of the great skills we're trying to build in them as well.
Amazing. And that's totally true for consultants, right? You feel like the data education piece is almost like a moving target because you're like, oh, it's Alteryx, now it's AI, and it's going to be all of these things. And of course, as problem solvers for customers, they have to be the first and the best at learning all of these new technologies. So definitely couldn't agree more. And it ties back into, I guess, how digital upskilling is not a one time just get done sort of thing, but almost something that you have to constantly do, at least, especially in the consulting space. And on that line, I have spent a lot of time looking at the Plural Strategy account. Just for people on the webinar right now, Plural Strategy have excellent completion rates of Cubicle. Charlotte and her team are really, really good at firstly identifying learner personas within the organization, and then, of course, mapping back kind of learning tracks or learning curriculums across these levels. So, Charlotte, you mentioned earlier before, you know, you obviously have people that hire and then, you know, they work their way up into levels in as they would in a traditional consulting firm. But you also hire people joining in after their MBAs at a certain level. So maybe you want to talk to us a little bit about how you curate these excellent learning tracks for all of these levels.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think, you know, we're quite lucky in consulting that it's a fairly kind of linear journey upwards for most people. You know, it's, I guess, for a smaller firm like Plural, there aren't too many kind of different directions that you go. It tends to be that you kind of, you know, gradually, when you're ready, move up through the business, which lets us create a really nice curriculum of skills that you need to learn kind of at each level and progress that as you go. I mean, I think for us, one of the key things was, you know, when we looked at implementing kind of, you know, a new learning platform, what were we trying to solve for? And the thing for us was that we, like many consulting firms, our consultants will have gaps between projects. So they'll be on the bench for, you know, a week or two before they start their next project. And we weren't really taking advantage of that time when, you know, they're not manically busy, because obviously when everyone's on a project, it can be, you know, really, really busy. There's not much time to focus on upskilling yourself or L&D unless it's very narrowly within the confines of the project. so we were looking at ways that we could build a curriculum that takes advantage of everyone being on the bench, available to upskill themselves at different times. So a virtual learning solution that everyone can complete in their own time, absolutely right for us. And in terms of building curriculums, we actually do 6-month-long semesters for the most part, because of how people as projects run in terms of cycles and things. We know that people will usually have, 2 or 3 weeks at least of bench time in a 6-month period. So they'll definitely have enough time to do it. It might be all at the start, it might be all at the end, it might be spread out in the middle. It varies person to person. So I think that was the first thing for us, making it achievable and realistic in terms of timelines for people to complete. So important, because no one wants to feel like they're climbing an impossible hill or that pressure. You need to feel like people are really engaged. I think as well, it's we introduce all of these usually before people join. So there's usually kind of not for our interns, but for almost everything else, every other role, there's some kind of a couple of hours of kind of pre-work to do before you actually start. That really gets everyone engaged with the platform. It's one of the first things they see before they start at Plural. So they're already familiar with it. They're already kind of excited and ready to go on that learning journey. It's already kind of front of mind. You can see that early training tab. That's for the analysts. That's exactly what that tab is. And then I think the last thing that was really important for us is that we worked with the team in our organization to evolve these. So what is actually practical and useful at each level, at each stage. I can maybe have a broad outline, but I'm not doing the job. I'm not, they know best, they're the experts, the people who've gone on that journey before. Utilizing that expertise is so key. And then we evolve that. So we have catch up.
So you're making your confidence coaches, like Jane mentioned before.
Exactly.
Isn't that interesting, right? It's really good to put that into a company lens. I always ask this question to like different L&D people, because we talk to different people, right? And just for context, we use Plural Strategy for internal training purposes, just because they have such good completion rates in the example here. So I just picked out a sample from your analysts course completion. And just for context, what you're looking at the screen here is people when they started out, were they looking at kind of weak, needs improvement, and strong? And this is based on a skills assessment that we do within Cubicle. And then the completion rates for this cohort were absolutely excellent. So firstly, I'm going to ask you 2 questions, and I'll let you answer both of them in your time. But what is the secret sauce, right? Because there's loads of people that are like, oh, we spend all this time in getting this e-learning resource. We have all of this time in trying to get people all of the resources that they need. But how do we actually achieve this learner level engagement and completion? And secondly, what do you think is a good amount of time that a learner should be spending doing upskilling, right? Because let's face it, sometimes we listen to people and they say that, oh, we want people to do like 19 hours of learning, right? But there's an opportunity cost of training. Every time, every hour that you're spending training is time you're not doing billable customer work. So how do you achieve that balance and this absolutely amazing completion rate?
I'll actually answer your second question first and then circle back.
Absolutely.
So I actually think putting a time amount on anything is quite reductive. I think you've got to look at the needs of the individual or the cohort or where they need to be in their journey. So I think you can definitely have too much training. It has to be realistic. It has to be achievable. But to say specifically we want 19 hours or something like that, it's arbitrary. It should be how can we actually get people to the point we want them to get to, and how much time. Also, because your learners will invest a different amount of time. Like if we scroll back slightly to the slide before, which was where we started at, you can see we do have some green on various topics. Some of our team were obviously very familiar with this when they came in. Some were really not familiar. And, with some of these skills, obviously everyone had gaps, had things to learn. And, the whole point for us is presenting it in a way that we're trying to give you all the tools to succeed. And, our team really buy into that. I mean, it definitely helps that we really look when we hire for people who are, really motivated and excited about learning. I mean, it's great for consulting. You're constantly learning things about your client. That kind of curiosity is such a key, a a key competency for us that I think, you know, our team definitely helped. They're amazing. They're really engaged. So, you know, I do think there is something to be said for, if you want kind of a really curious, engaged workforce, hiring a really curious, engaged workforce definitely helps. But I would say that, yeah, it's far too arbitrary to stick a number on it. Our MBAs, for example, they end up having a lot more in their curriculum because we don't know where their gaps are, because they're coming in at a bit more of a senior level. They'll have worked somewhere else and done their MBA. They have different gaps, but a lot more of that curriculum is optional. So it's only something that you would take, for example, if you were not strong on that skill. So there's lots of ways to flexibly create a curriculum that makes people still feel like they're achieving lots.
Absolutely. And for an organization that's doing upskilling really well, it makes sense to hire for the person and not necessarily for the skills, because clearly you can develop those through the sort of learning solutions that you were deploying. That is amazing. And kind of on the cultural side of things, right? Like, how do you? We talked a little bit about the CDLO, which is you partially play that role in the organization right now. How do you bake that into the DNA of the organization?
I think one of the really interesting things that we always try and do, which I'm sure a lot of companies do, when they implement a new solution, well, firstly, we think about what we're solving for, then we try and find the best solution in the market that will, will create that. Then we always trial anything before we implement it. So, you know, for when we implemented Cubicle, we had I think it was a month-long trial with a group of kind of 5 or 6 of our team. They did lots of different courses. We had a big focus group. We all fed back. So, you know, there was lots of initial engagement and involvement, and those individuals obviously then could become change champions internally and really recommend the platform. It helped me. I referred back to it on my next case. Super useful. So I think things like that, but also I think it's an evolution. You know, we still do focus groups. We take and add courses onto our syllabus depending on our team's recommendation. It's interactive, and you know, I think that's really, really important. We also, you know, we do refer back to it. You know, it has to be a looped up process. We have a real advantage as a small company because there's it's easier to be looped into everything. But for example, you know, when we're doing reviews or appraisals, you know, our managers will notice if someone has a skills gap, and they'll recommend sending them to Cubicle or, you know, to another training solution. You know, we obviously don't purely use online learning. We also run internal sessions, external sessions. I think for us, it's really important to have kind of a really
Like a
varied curriculum.
blended learning.
Lots of different mediums, because if you have one narrow way of teaching a skill, then it's easier to become disengaged, I think.
Thanks for that. We also have a poll on the screen now. So um, if people on the webinar now have any insights on how we can assist them further in their data literacy journey, fire away. And with that, we also asked Charlotte to share a few of her tips on anybody who is looking to implement a data literacy program. We have loads of learning and development people on this webinar right now. Um, would you quickly talk us through, and you mentioned this before in our chat as well, knowing the exact problem that you're trying to solve for and not just checking this box of data literacy, right?
Exactly. Like every team will have a different need. There will also be different issues. Is it that people are not focusing data literacy? Is it a time thing? Can you block off time per week to do it? Is it that they don't have access to the resources they need? Can you bring in those resources? Is it that those skills actually don't exist in a more senior level in the organization, so there's no way for them to filter down because they're not there sufficiently to begin with? You know, if you can't work out what all the facets are to the problem, you're never going to have an effective solution. So I think I mentioned for us, you know, the not utilizing our bench time was a real problem because that's such an amazing L&D time that we could be utilizing. So that was one of the big drivers for us implementing something like Cubicle. Equally, you know, if we'd have purely tried to develop a curriculum internally, that wouldn't have solved the problem, because not everyone would have been available for in-person trainings at the same time for that particular issue. I think obviously you need organizational buy-in. So taking everyone on that journey with you, so important. And obviously your leadership team need to be brought into it. It's not something they might necessarily need to use, but they need to understand, you know, what it is and the value that it can bring. And I think, you know, any effective data that you can present on that point often presents a convincing argument there.
Every
It's
L&D
all a bit
person
circular
would
here.
agree. Exactly. And I think that's what you share kind of in your measuring results bit here, right? Because that needs to feed back to the buy-in to show ROI or success, which we do a lot here, which I do a lot here in my role at Cubicle as well. So if you're keen to learn a little bit more about how we show ROI through digital upskilling, happy to have a chat. But also the main one for you, Charlotte, again, coming back to cultural, which is change champions. Is it your MBAs? Is it your coaches? You're curious. How are you spreading that culture into the org again?
I mean, you know, as I said, our team are fantastic, and lots of people are really engaged. I think, you know, we also ask people, you know, hey, we're doing a focus group. If anyone wants to come along and give us some ideas, then please do. You know, I think different people will have different time commitments at different times. I think change champions often identify themselves. Equally, I think if you know that you have someone who is really, really strong on all things data, you have to utilize that skill and
Yeah.
involve them. You know, I'm all for asking for volunteers, but there are some individuals that you're like, you know, I need your expertise, and you know, I think that's so key.
Yeah, yeah. And like the poll has already ended, but if you have any further comments, feel free to pop it in the chat. Just to see, we're a bit over time right now, but I would love to have Jane back with us and take a few questions that we have in the panel here. Welcome back, Jane, and thanks, Charlotte, for talking us through the micro aspect of stuff. So I'm just gonna, out of interest of time, maybe pick two questions, one for each of you, and then we can take any over email or pop them in the chat or email Charlotte, myself, or Jane for later. So this is a really good one, and I'm guessing, Jane, this one's for you. How realistic do you think is that everybody becomes data literate? Like, is that the utopian dream? Is that realistic? And what does success look like in that space?
So I would suggest that everyone is already data literate to different levels. And it's our challenge and our opportunity to understand what that current level of data literacy is and work out how we can nurture and grow that in a scalable way that also meets the objectives and the requirements of the organization that is investing in that skill development.
Amazing. And you do advocate for data literacy for all, right? Like I've as a part of data to the people, like that's your mission. What do you mean by that? Like data literacy for all,
Really
and
quick
why?
story.
Yeah.
Really quick story. A long time ago, the tools that we needed to learn how to read and write were only available to the very rich and the very powerful people. The people who could read and write used these skills to become even more rich and powerful. And that is until the point in time when the tools to learn how to read and write became available to everyone. Literacy finally became possible for every man, woman, and child, and literacy, our ability to read, write, and comprehend, became the foundation of education and the key to engaging and thriving in society. I'm very passionate that we are very quickly approaching a time when literacy is not going to be enough for us to live productive and successful lives. We need new skills to help us unlock the possibilities and opportunities of the new economy. We don't need to all to be experts in data, but we do know how to read, write, and comprehend data as it relates to our daily lives. I really do feel that right now we are standing at the precipice at a point where we can drive data literacy for all, or we can allow it to become a new divide between rich and poor, vulnerability and power. So data literacy has to be developed across all populations, all ages, all communities, so we can make sure that no one is left behind.
That is so powerful and such a cool and academic perspective on that. Thanks for that, Jane. And I have time enough for one last question for Charlotte. Um, and I guess this would be interesting just based on, you know, pre-COVID and how data literacy or just upskilling in general, we saw at least a big shift in training and adoption of training going fully virtual. Do you have any practical strategic advice, Charlotte, for just, virtual data literacy solutions? I know you guys use like a hybrid and a blended approach, but basically around the virtual stuff.
I think the thing I think it's really important to think of the format that virtual learning is being delivered in. So I think virtual learning can still be really engaging as long as it is designed to be engaging. The last thing everyone wants is to sit, if you're on a long training, to sit on kind of a 3-hour training all in one go in front of your computer screen. It's a long time to keep that engagement, really long time. It's easy in person. You might go out for a coffee break. There's different activities, different interactions. It's very hard to keep that level of engagement in front of a screen. So I think, there's several things. Having training that can be easily broken down into kind of short, digestible chunks, super important, really, 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 really useful. The other thing is any way you can make it interactive. So just because it's virtual doesn't mean that there can't be questions to answer, exercises to do as you work through a training. And I think any solutions like that, any training where you get to practically apply the skills always embeds better. And I think the same is absolutely true virtually. But I think there is sometimes a skew with some virtual trainings into it just being kind of a lecture. And although we all, enjoy formats like this, where there's the opportunity to ask questions, you have different speakers, and, we're learning for an hour or so, if you extend it beyond that, or that is only the format that you're delivering all your virtual training in, it gets very challenging.
Yeah, and so from that, what were the biggest challenges that you perhaps faced while trying to deliver a virtual learning program at Plural?
I think the big time investment for us was actually getting it all set up at the beginning, because you basically had to have someone do the entire cubicle syllabus almost to identify which were the key trainings for us that were really additive. So it was a huge time investment from our team early on. It was very worth it, and we obviously iterate it now, which it's a lot easier to iterate once we put all that work in at the beginning. But that first pre-launch kind of testing and curriculum development, it was worth it, but a huge amount of work.
Yeah, it's like taking the extra wheels of a child's bike and then just getting them on the push, right? Well, with that, thanks so much, both of you, for your time, and thank you everyone who has joined us today. Apologies if we could not take your question in the time that we had, but you can feel free to email them to me at abishen, which is abishen at cubicle.com. And of course, this webinar is available for download and watching later on. And luckily, so is the global data literacy benchmark report for 2023, thanks to Jane. But thanks all, and I hope you have a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you.
You
Bye. Bye.